The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. Jesus went across the Sea of Galilee. A large crowd followed him because they saw the signs he was performing on the sick. Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. The Jewish feast of Passover was near. When Jesus raised his eyes and saw that a large crowd was coming to him, he said to Philip, "Where can we buy enough food for them to eat?" He said this to test him because he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 200 days' wages worth of food would not be enough for each of them to have a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, the brother of Simon Peter, said to him, "There's a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. What good are these for so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people recline." Now there was a great deal of grass in that place, so the men reclined, about 5,000 in number. Then Jesus took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed them to those who were reclining, and also as much of the fish as they wanted. When they had had their fill, he said to his disciples, "Gather the fragments left over so that nothing will be wasted." So they collected them and filled 12 wicker baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves. That had been more than they could eat. When the people saw the sign he had done, they said, "This is truly the prophet, the one who is to come into the world." Since Jesus knew that they were going to come and carry him off to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain alone. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
The hand of the Lord feeds us. He answers all our needs. The hand of the Lord feeds us. The Lord feeds us out of abundance so that we have more than we need. This is a message coming out of the 2nd book of Kings involving Elisha the prophet. Elisha wants to distribute barley loaves to the crowd, and someone objects to that, saying, "Well, that's not enough. We just have 20 barley loaves." But Elisha insisted that we give people something to eat. They shall eat and shall have some left over. And sure enough, they had barley loaves left over. This is reflected in the message of the gospel from the Gospel of John. During this season, we've been reading consecutively through the Gospel of Mark, but we're going to take a break from that for a few weeks as we focus in on the Bread of Life discourse in the Gospel of John. Begins today, chapter 6, verse 1, when Jesus crosses the Sea of Galilee. And as we heard in the Gospel, all the people follow him. They want to see what he's doing and hear him preach. The evangelist says that the Jewish feast of Passover was near, so we know it was springtime. It was spring. And when the crowds approach and Jesus is concerned about them needing something to eat, he asks Philip, "Where can we buy enough food for them to eat?" Bible scholars say that the reason he's asking Philip that is because this is occurring in a place where Philip lives, and that Jesus doesn't know where you can go buy food. He's not familiar with that area, but Philip is. There's an addition of a sentence that said, Jesus said this to test him, Philip, because he himself knew what he was going to do. Bible scholars say that's an addition after the gospel was written, because it made the community anxious that Jesus didn't know everything. And this is 60 years after the time of Jesus, and they were seeing Jesus as reigning supreme and that Jesus knows everything. Well, that certainly isn't true in the Synoptic Gospels with Matthew, Mark, and Luke. There's times when Jesus doesn't know what's going to happen. In fact, he even will change his mind. And so they say that that was entered in this gospel to reassure the people, well, he did know everything. He was just testing. But Philip says that, well, we can't get enough to feed all these people. And so Andrew, the brother of Simon Peter, says that there's this kid here with 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what good is that? But Jesus says that the people should recline. Gospel says that there was a great deal of grass in that place, again an indication that this is occurring in the spring, because the grass wouldn't be there otherwise in other parts of the year. And so they reclined. It said there's about 5,000 in number of the men. In those days in this culture, men and women did not associate in public. That was seen as unseemly. So what the situation is, they have this big crowd. They have all the men sit over here, and then all the women and children sit over there. And so the evangelist focuses in on the men sitting in all of this nice green grass, but that's assuming there's also another group of women and children. So 5,000 men, we could guess that maybe there's 10,000 people altogether. So then Jesus takes the 5 loaves, and then the evangelist says something very important. He took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed them to those who were reclining. That sounds familiar. Jesus takes, breaks, distributes after he blesses the bread. It's to remind us of the Last Supper. That's just what he did at the table around the Last Supper, was took the bread, blessed it, broke it, and gave it to those around the table, saying, "This is my body." And so this is anticipating that, and John is purposely doing that. And then there are more food than people can eat. Everyone has their fill, and Jesus asks that the fragments be picked up so that nothing is wasted. Maybe it will be given to the poor. But when they take out their baskets and fill them up, there's 12 baskets. 12 baskets. Maybe one for each apostle, or maybe signifying the 12 tribes of Israel. People are very impressed with this miracle of the feeding of the 5,000. The barley loaves are important because it makes a connection with the first reading from 2 Kings. Elisha also had barley loaves. Now Jesus has barley loaves. Barley loaves made out of barley. That is the grain of the poor. It was very cheap. It grew readily in that hot area. Wheat, on the other hand, was much more vulnerable to lack of water and the heat, and so wheat was more expensive. Barley grew every place. It was very hardy, and so that was very available to the people at a reasonable price. And so a lot of their bread that they ate was barley bread, and so they are impressed with the miracle and say this is truly a prophet, because there's maybe making that connection with Elisha. Elisha fed his people with all of that barley bread, and here's Jesus doing something very similar. And so this is truly a prophet, at which point Jesus sort of disappears into the hills because he doesn't want them to come and sort of sing his praises and carry him off to be king. It's not his time. We are called to appreciate the generosity of God. This multiplication of the loaves in the Gospel of John prefigures the Eucharist, but it also demonstrates the abundance that God has to give his gifts to us. We have more than we need, more than we need. We have all of our needs met. They may not be always what we wanted. Well, I didn't want that, or I'd rather have that. But that's not up to us. The Lord will take care of us. The Lord will give us all that we need. And sometimes we'll say, well, I want that, but what we don't realize, we already have it. It's already in our lives. We just didn't recognize it, the blessings that the Lord gives us. And so we're called to be appreciative of how the Lord feeds us. But he feeds us not just with bread or just food. He also feeds us with his gifts. And in the second reading in St. Paul's letter to the Ephesians, he's telling people to be like the Lord, be generous like the Lord, be patient, be gentle, be humble like the Lord is. And so we too are called to reflect this reality of the generosity of God towards all of us, and to treat other people with kindness, with humility, with patience, Don't be hard on them. In our culture, we can be hard on people. We have expectations, and we expect people to meet them 100%. We want perfection, and we'll stand for nothing less, whether it's how the child makes his or her room, cleans up his room, makes the bed. Well, that's not right. You didn't do it right. Or the grades aren't right at school, or the spouse didn't do what they were supposed to do perfectly. And so we can be angry and resentful, and it can make us bitter. But we're called not to be like that. We're called to give people a break, just like God does, just like Paul is talking about. Be patient with people, be gentle and be humble. And don't have these high expectations of people that it's very difficult for people to meet. When I had a counseling practice, I worked with many families, and something I would talk with them about is be 80% people. You don't have to be 100%. Don't expect your child to be perfect. First of all, they can't be, and you're just going to be endlessly frustrated because they didn't get what you expected. They didn't reach that goal or attain that grade or didn't accomplish that in their lives, and so then we're frustrated with them and angry. But don't do that. Lower the standards. Lower the standards to standards that people can meet, that they can achieve at. So then they're happy because they're, 80% people, they're 80% okay, and then you can calm down and not be upset and angry all the time because you just don't expect so much out of people, because that's how God is with us. God does not expect us to be perfect. And so we should not expect one another to be perfect, whether it's the people you see on TV or the people you read about in the paper or people in your family, your children or your spouse or your grandchildren and the friends that you have. Don't be hard on them. The Lord is calling us to be humble, and St. Paul is telling us to be gentle and patient. Just calm down. Just take a deep breath. If you find that response that you feel irritated, that irritation, you can feel it. Maybe your teeth sort of clench. Or you can feel the tightness in your neck. Take that as a sign that you're on the wrong path, because you're being irritated, and part of it is that you're the problem, not them. You're the problem because our standards are too high. We need to calm down, settle in, let people be 80% people. It's okay to be a B student. You don't have to be A all the time. Just be a good B student and be responsible and dedicated. And you can also be a B person. Be an 80% person, and that's good enough, and God loves us for that, and we should treat one another in that way so that we treat people with the gentleness and kindness that St. Paul calls us to be as we interact with the brothers and sisters in our lives.